We found each other. In relation to Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, this harmless phrase sounds both scary and extremely accurate at the same time. These young people looked like a happy married couple, but turned out to be one of the most violent criminals in Canada who dealt with unhappy schoolgirls. Carla Homolka was born in 1970 and grew up in a full-fledged family near Toronto. She had a loving father and mother, as well as two sisters, the elder Lori and the younger Tammy. The girl studied at school, loved animals, and worked part-time in a pet store. In a word, she led a fairly standard and quite serene life of a teenager. At the age of 17, Carla met a charming young man, student Paul Bernardo. The 23-year-old was a rare handsome man, tall, blond, charming, with an open smile. He quickly endeared himself to a new acquaintance. The guys immediately got carried away with each other. On the first evening they chatted for several hours. The relationship began very quickly, and very soon Carla and Paul were known among friends and acquaintances as a pair of inseparable. It seemed that these two were made for each other. There were also frightening secrets in Paul's biography. The boy's childhood was not at all as cloudless as his girlfriend's. As a teenager, he learned that his father was not his own, and it was a shock for the teenager. He was angry at his mother for her lies. In addition, the parents lived like on a volcano. The mother constantly snapped at her son. And the father, as it turned out later, turned out to be a criminal at all. He seduced his own daughter, Paul's sister. During the period of growing up, the teenager developed a passion for spying on women. The young man constantly watched the lives of his neighbors through open windows, especially being carried away by the process when women began to change clothes or fell asleep. However, at the time of his acquaintance with Carla, no one guessed about such an oddity of gender. During the period of the events described, Scarborough, one of the districts of Toronto, was going through difficult times. In this area, one after another, crimes began to occur, the brutal rapes of young women. Parks, small alleys, and other quiet places have ceased to be safe. Girls were attacked during jogging or late walks. The police immediately assumed that a maniac was operating. Despite the fact that he attacked in such a way that the victims did not see him and could not accurately describe him, the handwriting of the rapist in all cases coincided. As a result, one of the victims was still able to provide scant information about the alleged offender. According to them, he was quite tall and had blonde hair. The police compiled a huge list of suspects and began checking for DNA tests. In the 1980s, this analysis was very expensive and not at all as fast as it is today, so the research took a long time. Paul's acquaintances, who at that time was happily dating Carla, met her parents and charmed the whole family, reported him to law enforcement agencies because it seemed to them that he fit the description of the criminal. The police responded to the signal. Bernardo was invited to the station, where they took his genetic material for a test, and then they just let me go. Paul and Carla were getting married. The stranger the request looks, which the young man expressed to his bride on the eve of the wedding. He stated, he doesn't like that Carla wasn't a virgin by the time she met him. But 15-year-old Tammy, Carla's sister, is just innocent, and Paul would be pleased if the girl's virginity got to him as a kind of compensation. Any other girl would probably have been shocked by such a statement from the groom, but Carla treated him not only with understanding, but also with enthusiasm. She really set out to give Paul her sister's virginity. The couple came up with a plan. Carla had to take a soporific drug from the veterinary clinic where she worked at the time and put in Tammy. And when she turns off, leave her to Paul. That's exactly what happened. Well, almost, Bernardo installed a camera and recorded the creepy process on video. The worst thing happened later. After a giant dose of the drug, Tammy did not wake up. The girl died. It is not known exactly how Paul and Carla managed to cover up the traces of their crime, but Tammy's death was recognized as an accident. Allegedly, the schoolgirl drank too much alcohol, and her body could not stand it. The bride and groom continued to live as if nothing had happened. 6 months after Tammy's murder, they got married. In the wedding photos, the couple looks absolutely happy and in love. Could anyone have imagined that these cute, smiling newlyweds would turn out? Paul met Leslie right outside her house. A young man was driving by in a car, stopped and spoke to the girl. Information varies, but according to one version, that evening Leslie returned home later than she promised her parents, and they closed the front door in front of her daughter's nose for educational purposes. The schoolgirl stayed on the lawn of the townhouse, and when a nice stranger started a conversation with her, she approached his car. Bernardo threatened her to get into a car and drove his victim 50 kilometers away to his home. There in the basement, Paul and Carla bullied Leslie for a whole day. However, the hour was approaching when Carla's parents were supposed to come to visit, and the rapists decided to get rid of the girl. They killed her. Young Kristen has already been lured by Carla. She and Paul pretended that they were lost and were wandering by car in an unfamiliar part of the city. Homolka was holding a map in her hands and turned to a passing girl with an innocent question. She asked to show the way. Approaching the car, Kristen, like her predecessor, received a portion of terrible threats from Paul and a quiet order to get into the car. Neither alive nor dead from fear, the girl fulfilled the kidnapper's demand right in broad daylight in front of peaceful passers-by. She faced the same fate as the unfortunate Leslie Mahaffey. Carla and Paul did not attract attention to themselves for a long time, secretly doing their dirty deeds. They have accumulated a terrible video library with recordings of crimes. However, in the relationship of the couple itself, everything was not too smooth. Over time, Paul directed his aggression against Carla herself. Once he beat her so that it was impossible to hide the traces with makeup. My wife came up with an excuse. They say she got into a minor accident. Colleagues did not believe her and strongly advised her to report domestic violence, and also called her parents. Father and mother came to pick up Carla and took her to the hospital to document the presence of injuries. She also wrote a statement to the police that her husband had beaten her. They opened a case against Paul, arrested him, but later released him on his own recognizance. Apparently, he felt that exposure was not far off and attempted suicide. But the amazing thing is that Paul was saved. One of his friends found his suicide note and prevented suicide. Meanwhile, the police got their hands on a DNA sample that Bernardo had once handed over as part of the investigation into the Scarborough rapist. The test showed that it was Paul who kept the whole neighborhood at bay. Pulling this thread, law enforcement officers went out to murder. A lot of information was also received from Carla. She cooperated with the police and told about the atrocities that had happened, presenting everything in such a way that Paul kept her in wild fear and forced her to participate in luring victims, whom he then raped and killed himself. Meanwhile, Bernardo testified that it was Carla who killed the girls. The moments of violence were not captured on the video, as it became known later. That is, the husband and wife blamed each other. The police were expected to believe Carla more. The young woman was very successful in portraying an innocent victim, and even without her testimony it turned out to be very difficult to gather evidence and build a line of accusation. The films had not yet been found. As a result, the prosecution offered Carla a mutually beneficial option. She made a deal to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a prison sentence of only 12 years. When the deal was already concluded, the police found the same videos. They say that Paul himself confessed to his lawyer where they were lying, and he found them and looked at them. What he saw shocked the defender so much that he stopped sleeping at night and eventually took the records to the police himself. If the tapes had been found earlier, Carla would hardly have been offered such a humane deal with the investigation and a short term. According to eyewitnesses, these videos make it clear that she herself was happy to participate in rapes and bullying and acted not just as an intimidated performer, but quite an active figure. Until now, this case is considered one of the serious errors of Canadian justice. In various sources, you can find all sorts of details about how the case was conducted and where the investigators got this or that information. Sometimes the information even contradicts each other. However, this is understandable. Usually, over time, such high-profile cases become overgrown with rumors and versions concerning details multiply day by day. The fact remains that Paul Bernardo was sentenced to life imprisonment and Carla Homolka served 12 years in prison. Apparently, none of them really repented of what they had done. Paul petitioned several times to review the conditions of his detention, and even tried to find some loopholes in the law so that the commission would remove the status of a particularly dangerous criminal from him. Fortunately, this did not happen, and he is still in custody. Carla was released in 2005 and quickly recovered from the experience. She changed her name, married her lawyer's younger brother, and had 3 children, and then left Canada. For a long time, the couple lived in Guadeloupe, and Homolka, who became Liana Bordelli, even worked as a volunteer at the school where her children studied. However, later apparently, the family still wanted to return to their homeland, so they did, and settled in Quebec. Despite the name change, the locals did not hide who now lives next door to them. They say that Homolka is met with public censure wherever she goes.